Hi guys, welcome to today's show. I have a very special guest with us today to share a bit more on Singapore versus Switzerland.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Marion. I moved to Singapore a bit more than a year ago now, and the minute I arrived, I fell in love with this place. Not complaining about Switzerland, which is a very beautiful country indeed, but it's just way too cold there. So I'm in love with the humidity here and the hot weather and the food, and I could probably talk for an hour about how much I love Singapore.
How do you first get to know about Singapore and when do you first reach the shores over here?
Well, I came here in November 2022 because of my ex-partner's job. He unfortunately didn't like Singapore so much, so he's back in Switzerland, but I decided to stay here for good. And I work as a full-time content creator, which has opened me so many doors to explore Singapore even more and I got to know so many inspiring and interesting people.
Before we go on the discussion about finance, maybe I'd like to probe a bit deeper. What are your goals as a content creator right here in Singapore? Just in case there's someone who is looking for inspiration.
Yeah, so my goal is basically to show you what Singapore has to offer because I get very angry when people say Singapore is boring. And then my first thought is, yeah, maybe you're boring, because Singapore is honestly, if you open your eyes, there's so many things to do. Also, a lot of free things to do, which I do videos about, like free things to explore around the city. I give a lot of food tips, like hidden gems, rooftop bars. Also, I share about what you maybe shouldn't do in Singapore. Like I share, exciting experiences like rage rooms or at what you can do in Sentosa. So basically, whoever wants to explore and get to know Singapore better is right on my page. Also, I started to do some more fun content just to have a bit of entertainment and make you laugh, hopefully.
So, since we're on the topic about comparison of food prices and stuff, maybe I would like to get your insights. Firstly, how is it like between Singapore and Switzerland based on your observation? Because for myself, I haven't been to Switzerland, and all I hear is Switzerland is a very expensive place to visit.
Yes, for sure. I think Singapore food and Switzerland food is one of the biggest differences, in my opinion, because Singapore has everything. They have a lot of cheap options such as hawker foods, and you can go to wet markets and they do groceries like for a pretty affordable price. Whereas in Switzerland, you seriously don't have any cheap options to buy food or like eat out. The cheapest meal, if you want to go and eat out, is probably a pizzeria where you buy a pizza for $30 and you have to buy a soft drink, which is another $9. So basically, a meal out is $35 to $40, and that's probably the cheapest you can get.
That's in Sing dollar, right? Not Swiss francs, right?
Yes. So I think that you can get a pizza for 22 Swiss francs, which is around 30 Singapore dollars.
So does
That
that mean that most would cook at home or
Yes. So when I was living in Zurich, I would not eat out on a regular basis at all. And I would do all my groceries for the low budget items, but also it has gotten very expensive but also groceries have increased their prices over the past 2 years, whereas now I was shocked when I was back in Switzerland in December and I went grocery shopping and a cucumber was around that was 280 Swiss francs. Yeah, that's like 450 Singapore dollars for one single cucumber. And even the groceries, yeah, they've gotten very expensive. So I know a lot of people even struggling with eating home to, yeah, to find affordable food.
I actually agree with you that Singaporeans take the hawker center culture for granted.
Yeah.
Because when I visit, overseas countries, even Malaysia, food there is relatively more expensive to an average income than in Singapore.
I mean, hawker centers, I have not heard of hawkers before coming to Singapore, and it's honestly the best. One of the things I love the most about Singapore. And it's also a reason why I have not really started cooking here, because if you want to buy the ingredients to make chicken rice yourself, that will cost way more than like you can get it as cheap as $5 and you have a proper meal for $5. And when I told my friends back home that I can get dumplings for $4, like down the street, everyone was so jealous. And like the sushi, best example, yeah, is sushi. So you buy here at even cold storage has very good sushi for $7 or Don Don Donkey for like $7 to $10, which is yeah, like 5 Swiss francs. And in Switzerland, you pay 12 Swiss francs for like 8 cucumber maki. That's 20 Singapore dollars for 8 cucumber maki. If I tell this to people in Singapore, they think this is mad.
Maybe because of the rice you need to import over there, it's a lot more expensive.
Yeah, but cucumber and rice is not very,
Yeah.
no, that's not very hard to import.
What have you seen in your comment sections before when you discuss about food costs in Singapore and food costs in Switzerland? What are some misconceptions?
I always hear the general debate about, well, Singapore is so expensive because you have such a high rental prices. And I think, yes, this is true. Rent is actually quite expensive in if you compare it to the rest of the living costs. And then say, okay, Switzerland is much cheaper. But actually, this is not true because the rent is really more or less the same in Singapore and in Switzerland. If you compare a 3-bedroom apartment in the city center, it's approximately the same. But the rest of the cost of living in Singapore is way more affordable because you have all these cheaper options. Of course, if you take a Grab all day and if you shop at Orchard Road, yes, it's expensive, but you can always find a cheap option. Whereas in Switzerland, for all these things, you don't have a cheaper option. The train, when the public transport is so expensive, when I take the train from my mom's house to the city center, that's not even a 15 minutes train ride. One way costs me 9 Singapore dollars. So if I see a friend to have a drink or a coffee, it's 9 Singapore dollars one way, and I have a coffee for $9, and I take the train back. That's 27 Singapore dollars for going to see a friend to have a coffee. And in Singapore, you can literally like have coffee for 150. You know what I mean? So if you want to make it affordable here in Singapore, you can. And if you want to live affordable in Switzerland, there's not much choice.
On that point, it's like when we travel to overseas countries, maybe like Australia and US, taxi rides are so expensive over there. And in
Yes,
Singapore, there's public transport, which is, very affordable. And the cab rides are actually not expensive.
when I was living in Zurich, it would never even cross my mind to take a taxi just for on a random day. I mean, here in Singapore, honestly, if it's like raining and like I have so much to carry, I can't afford a Grab ride for like 10 Singapore dollars, which is 7 Swiss francs for a 15 minutes ride. I can't afford that like once in a while. In Switzerland, if I would do that, that would cost me 50 Singapore dollars minimum. So it's not even like, it doesn't even cross my mind. It's not an option for people.
Then what about for car ownership? Is it common in Zurich or not? Because in Singapore, the complaint is usually our car prices are the highest in the world. Is it common to own a car in Zurich?
I think it depends. I think it depends on where you live, but I would say yes, it is more common to have a car. It's also very common to have a motorbike or a Vespa, like it's more a scooter, which is kind of affordable in comparison to the rest, especially when you compare to public transport prices. So yes, I shared a car with my brother. The fuel, yes, it's very expensive, but in comparison to Singapore, definitely more affordable. I think that's the only thing that's probably less expensive in Switzerland is the cars are less expensive. But that's really probably the only thing I can think of.
But in Singapore, we can take, the train rides, the bus rides, and the cab fares are probably even cheaper than in Zurich.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, public transport in Singapore is so cheap and it's great. It's clean, it's efficient.
Yeah, so if I want to go Switzerland for a tour, is there any tips that you would think of if I go visit there? How to save on traveling costs if I do a backpack?
Well, I have not backpacked myself, but I know a lot of people that they plan a lot in advance. You can't find hostels, you can't find, very good travel deals. There is this so-called discount tram and train rides where you book like a ticket in advance. so you can save a bit of money on the train. And there are promotions from time to time. So if you book a lot in advance, you can find special deals, especially in hotels and if you go off season. But basically, yeah, if you want to go skiing on Christmas, there's probably not much you can save or like no cheap options. I always say if you want to go skiing with your family to the Swiss mountains, you can go to the Maldives for like a 5-star hotel.
Oh, what about skiing in like other parts of Europe near Switzerland? I've heard of a friend who says that you probably get Alps on the French side, which is just as nice.
Yes.
How do you feel about this perspective?
Well, I'm Swiss and I grew up in the Swiss mountains and we had a house in the Swiss mountains. So we went skiing very often. I do know that a lot of people go to Austria, for example, because
Hmm.
the day pass is a lot cheaper there. But it's also like, yeah, it's a longer journey to get there. And then you have to, for example, buy a hotel to stay there. So a lot of Swiss people, they go on day trips to the mountains just for skiing. So then you don't need a hotel, which is
Hmm.
quite doable. But I do know some people, they go to Italy, France, or Austria for a ski holiday.
I want to quiz you also about living costs in Switzerland. Now, if I were to think through living costs in Singapore, it feels like the usual cost like rent is expensive, but
Yeah.
other bills are not that expensive. Water bills, electricity bills.
That's also very expensive. I just paid what is very expensive is health insurance.
Hmm.
And I still pay my Swiss health insurance, which is 500 over 500 Swiss francs. And it's basically just the minimum I get. That is, you can do the math. What's that? Around
Hmm.
800 Singapore dollars. So that's a lot for just health insurance. And I'm not even privately insured. So I don't even have any luxuries included in that. So I think health insurance is one of the things Swiss people struggle the most with. I mean, mobile plans also
Hmm.
very expensive compared to Singapore. You pay like an all-inclusive. I paid 69 Swiss francs for like everything included, like unlimited data, phone calls. That's 100 Singapore
Yeah.
dollars a month.
Yeah, in Singapore, you can get like $10 SIM cards
Yeah,
very conveniently. But just like mentioned about health insurance, it's $800 Sing per month or per year?
per month.
Per month.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's what I currently pay.
Wow. In Singapore, we do have a lot of subsidies for insurance. It should cost, around like 1 to 2 thousand only per year basis. So it's
Yeah.
definitely on a much cheaper scale from that front.
And this is something I want to talk about as well. Singapore has a lot of subsidies from the government. HDBs, something like HDBs does not exist in Switzerland. If you want to rent something, yeah, you just have to rent. And also, if you want to buy something, there's nothing the government helps you out with. But here you have a lot of subsidies with HDBs, with housing. I heard that you can buy a house close to your parents' home, and then you also get like a grant. I
That's what
mean,
I
that's
cover on the channel a lot.
crazy. That's great, and then you get the vouchers. What are they called?
Yes, a CDC vouchers.
CDC vouchers. That's basically free money, or the
Mm,
government. I heard a friend of mine, her mother will have she gets subsidies on like activities to be she's a bit
mm.
older, so she's more active. Stuff like that does not happen in Switzerland.
It's a different style of government, right? In Singapore, yeah, we over rely maybe on government to take care of certain basic needs. And whenever they have any bad news, they tend to give some incentives also, just like they raise GST and therefore they decide to give more incentives and more vouchers.
I really think Singaporeans take what they have for granted, for sure. And honestly, I don't even blame them. I think it's for everyone who grows up in a place that you take what you have, what you know for
Mm.
granted. So that's basically also something I really want to share with my content to remind people here how good this place is. And I think the nicest compliment I got over the past year is when someone says, ever since I started to watch your content, I realized how great Singapore is.
Mm.
And you're probably seen more than Singapore than I have. And it really makes me start exploring my country more. And that's really my goal. And I'm happy if I can help out with that.
So do you see yourself in Singapore at least for the next few years ahead?
Yes, for
What are your
sure.
plans?
But I have found my happy place because I say Singapore combines the best of both worlds. People also say Singapore is the Asian Switzerland, which I think is very much true. Singapore, in my opinion, has everything. It has the convenience, it has the safety, it has, which like Singapore and Switzerland both, they're very safe, they have a high standard of living, they have good job opportunities, it's very developed, good healthcare. But then on top, you have the good weather. Switzerland is just so cold. You have affordable and good food. You have so many countries around you where you can just travel for with low and cheap flights. So yeah, I think for me and my life and what it's important to me, everything in Singapore is what I need.
Could I ask you a more personal question on the expenses? Because I do a lot of discussion on budgeting for families as well as what is day-to-day living costs. So from an expat's point of view, could you share a bit on the total expenses that you're incurring?
Okay, I have to say that me working as a content creator, I don't think I'm the best example to give you my budget because I'm very fortunate of being able to work with brands who take over the costs of my daily expenses. For example, I do have a hair sponsor or my manicure and pedicure. For example, I do content for them and then in exchange I get a manicure. But if I wasn't working as a content creator, I think it really depends on the lifestyle, obviously. If I wasn't a content creator and I was just paying my bills compared to Switzerland, I can live a way more luxurious lifestyle here in Singapore than I could in Switzerland. For example, I could never really afford it. I never went to like have my nails done at the salon because it's just very expensive. But here, I think it's still quite affordable. You can get and find cheap manicure. Same for hair salon. You can find good hairstylists for affordable prices. If I go to the hairdresser in Switzerland, it costs me 700 Singapore dollars because it like I do some coloring. But in here, I think it's half the price. The most I spend obviously is rent.
I just want to ask you about retirement from your perspective. You've seen Europe, you've seen Singapore. I understand next few years you're happy to be here. What are differences for Swiss people in terms of their retirement ideas versus Singaporeans that you hear about?
So for Swiss people, it's very common to, at a certain age, they either have someone to come on a daily or weekly basis to their home where they help you with their laundry and help you with their groceries and the things about around the house. And if you're around over 80, people go in foster homes, retirement homes, which then depends on what your budget is. There are very beautiful retirement homes on the lake, beautiful rooms, but these are very expensive. But I think here in Singapore, the government, as far as I know, they also have some institutions and programs which help elderly people to find a home and find like a cheaper place to live.
I think retirement homes are still a budding concept here in Singapore. Or rather, government is selling more retirement villages whereby elderly can buy at a discount rate with a short lease. It's more of you're on your own, and I guess the family nuclear style is a bit different in Asia.
Yeah.
Sounds like in Switzerland, the elderly people be on their own. Therefore, going to a retirement village is a
For
more
sure.
accepted norm.
Yeah, very much. I think this is also a big difference. And I was a bit shocked, honestly, when I came to Singapore, that people live with their parents for a very long time, especially out of the reason to save money on rent. But also I hear a lot that they want to take care of their parents because they got older and they want to help them around the house. And in Switzerland, people move out before 30 for sure. So if you're 30 and you say you still live with your mom, people would think, okay, what's wrong with this guy or girl? No, I'm exaggerating, but it's very common to move out quite early. And then usually they take care of themselves or they have we have companies to help out around the house. But then again, it's very expensive. So it depends on what your budget is.
So in Singapore, it's more of we hire helpers, right? Like I see a lot of families with an older folk, and if the children are working, they're staying together, they'll usually hire a helper.
Yeah, it was very interesting to experience that people have helpers here. This would be called like a nanny in Switzerland, which I personally don't know anyone who can afford a nanny or would want a nanny. What's very common is to have someone to come once a week to clean your house.
Mhm.
That's very common, but that's like once a week, but not someone staying at your place.
Maybe I can help us do a quick summary. Food costs in Singapore is really very cheap. You always have the option of hawker centers. I think something to be grateful. In terms of transport, it looks like for every developed country, there's good transport system, but nowhere could be as cheap as Singapore in terms of our bus rates and our train ride rates. Last but not least, I think our Singapore culture, our Singapore government system has a lot of support in terms of healthcare insurance, such as in terms of subsidies given to low income families that sometimes we take for granted. And we hear perspectives from other countries. We should remember that we are quite fortunate in Singapore. For anyone who's curious to hear about Marion's story, I'll leave her links below. Thank you, Marion, for taking this discussion.
Thank you very much for having me.
And together we'll see you next video. Take care
Bye.
and goodbye.